Hello, I'm Adam Fleming from the BBC World Service. This is The Global Story. The US government is in the process of suing some of the biggest tech companies on the planet: Apple, Google, Amazon, and the social media giant Meta. Washington says they've created monopolies over the technology that now controls many aspects of our everyday life. And there is one woman who's becoming the face of this battle. Millennial, Asian, British-born Lina Khan is leading the fight against some of Silicon Valley's biggest billionaires. We're asking the question, why is she taking them on? And can she win? Well, with me here in the studio is James Clayton, who works for the BBC in London, but until very recently was our North American tech reporter based in Silicon Valley. Welcome back, James.
Hello, Adam. Thanks for inviting me in. It's nice to actually be here in person.
Also joining us down the line from Washington is our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury. Hello, Michelle.
Hello from Washington, D.C.
James, what is the really simple way of understanding what antitrust is?
I mean, it's basically a monopoly. I mean, it's like if you held all the sweets in the world, you could charge anything you liked for your sweets, right? And the whole purpose of capitalism and competition is that there are lots of people that sell sweets, and as a result, there's a sort of competition for those prices, and the price of sweets comes down, and that's how capitalism and markets are supposed to work. The reason why we talk about antitrust is this concept is from the early 20th century, when a lot of American companies, kind of trusts, held huge amounts of sway and power over industries, in particular the railroads, oil. And because of that lack of competition, they could charge kind of what they wanted for the things that they were selling.
James, let's go from 1924 to 2024. And the superstar these days is Lina Khan, who is boss of the Federal Trade Commission. Just give us a little kind of pen portrait of who she is.
So Lina Khan, until relatively recently, was a student. She was doing a PhD at Yale. And then in 2017, she published this report, and it was about Amazon.
And it was in the Yale Law Review, wasn't it?
Right. It ended up getting a lot of attention. And the reason for that was she was sort of reimagining what antitrust might be, and essentially saying that Amazon, rather than it be this really popular, brilliant kind of platform that was great for consumers, was actually hurting consumers. And actually, we should think about antitrust in a slightly different way.
And Michelle, what was the story that then led to her being so important in the Biden administration?
What happens is she goes out of university, she starts to go into government. She takes a low-level job at the FTC. After that, she goes ultimately to become a professor. And that's the point at which Joe Biden wins the election and taps her to become one of the members of the board at the Federal Trade Commission, one of the sort of key big US enforcers of antitrust law. And she would be one of several members of the board, and she sort of won approval. And then, surprisingly, within hours of her nomination being approved, she was announced as the head of that committee. And that really sent a tremor through Washington, D.C., where I am, through lobbyists and through companies, as they started to think, well, hang on a second, now she's in charge, this young girl, is she going to suddenly start to bring this case against Amazon?
What do we know about her as a person? Is she one of these type A superachievers who gets up at 4 a.m, goes to the gym for 2 hours, fasts on a Tuesday, can horse ride, scuba dive, like lots of CEOs these days?
Yeah, you definitely get that. You definitely get that impression.
I'm not asking you to go through her daily schedule in 15-minute chunks.
She definitely has high standards. And I think there has been some pushback internally in the FTC that, you know, that when she came in, there was sort of a view that perhaps they weren't as efficient, as aggressive as they could have been. And Lina Khan, clearly incredibly ambitious. I mean, she was 32 when she got made head of the Federal Trade Commission. I mean, it's incredibly young, but her ambition has kind of not really worked in many ways. I mean, she hasn't really had very many successes. And it's been, nearly 3 years now since she took over. So very ambitious, but at the moment, not a lot to show for it.
And we'll come on to some of her wins and losses in a second. But Michelle, one of the things that explains her record of wins and losses is actually just the structure of how antitrust works in the US. The FTC, the Trade Commission, is only one body of several which kind of gets to dip an oar into this pond.
Yeah, and of course the other, as you're sort of alluding to there, is the Department of Justice. And there's another figure who's kind of leading the charge, if you like, slightly overshadowed by Lina Khan, but still a very prominent figure, and that's Jonathan Kanter. He's kind of the head of the antitrust division there. He's taken a very similar approach and shares clearly Lina Khan's philosophy, which is this sort of new, much broader view of what bringing these types of cases should be.
Right, now let's move on and talk about some of the individual claims and allegations against individual companies. Let's start with Apple. What is the case against Apple from Lina Khan's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple antitrust cases against Apple. The most kind of like obvious one is that Apple runs its own app store. That is very, very heavily criticized for being antitrust, a monopoly. You can't sideload other apps. You have to go through the app store. The accusations here are that just by owning this massive real estate in the app store, for example, that gives Apple a huge advantage, an unfair advantage over other companies. And it also means that there's just not a competition.
Apple, the troubles just keep piling up because it was the Department of Justice and Jonathan Kanter who just brought a case the other week. And that lawsuit argued that it violated antitrust laws, things like the fact that when it comes to messaging people on phones that aren't an iPhone, you get these kind of green bubbles with the 3 dots and the experience isn't as seamless. And one of the things listed in the filing against Apple was an exchange between Tim Cook, the current CEO of Apple, and a member of the audience at an event where he was speaking, where the person in the audience was complaining that his mum was having problems with texting someone who wasn't on an iPhone. And Tim Cook said, well, you just have to get her an iPhone. And I think that was the kind of evidence that the Justice Department was saying, well, look, there is an example of ways in which rather than trying to simply simplify the product and make it work better for consumers, they were choosing to kind of have this walled garden approach where it's essentially harder for outsiders to come in.
Right, Michelle, which big tech company should we look at next? You get to choose.
Oh, Amazon. So that is Lina Khan. The Federal Trade Commission and 17 states have sued the giant, basically saying that it has a monopoly over huge swathes of online retail. So when you become the dominant platform or gatekeeper, however you want to describe it, you in some ways get to set the terms. And not just that, but also now it's, for example, designing its own clothes and machine parts. So it's now has the data of some of the companies that are using the Amazon platform to sell their goods. And now they can kind of use that information when they're trying to make their own competing products. So that's the kind of behavior that they're saying is kind of exclusionary. It makes it harder for smaller rivals to kind of take advantage of the platform. And then that's where the consumer comes in. The sort of loss to the consumer is that you don't get that thriving marketplace that we should have.
It gets really serious now because we're going to talk about Meta. And Meta is the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, lots of other things. James, we're all quite familiar with the arguments about what they're doing with our data, what they're doing about misinformation and disinformation. Maybe people think less about actually what's it doing as a company vis-a-vis other companies.
The main accusation against Meta from an antitrust perspective is that it owns so many huge social media networks. So it owns Instagram, Facebook, obviously, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger is also massive.
Threads, anyone remember that?
Threads, there you go. So the main accusation is, should one company own so many of these social media platforms with so many users? And the big one is, should they have been allowed to have bought Instagram for $1 billion? It's now worth a lot more than that. Should have been allowed to have bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley will say, okay, that's fine, but it was never preordained that these companies were going to be quite as successful as they are now. You know, they bought Instagram for $1 billion. That's nothing in Silicon Valley. So there is an argument that Facebook made these companies what they are, and really from an antitrust perspective, it is much harder to launch the argument that there is a clear-cut case of a monopoly there on Facebook than others. So that is definitely a feeling in Silicon Valley that if you're going to get one of these companies, Meta is probably the hardest.
And Michelle, are you seeing it being a case of Mark Zuckerberg, founder, boss of Meta, versus Lina Khan? Is that the battle that's playing out?
I mean, he certainly had a few skirmishes with her, but I think all of this, the current running through all of this, is the idea that these are gatekeepers, and that, yes, it wasn't evident at the beginning when they were just starting, these sort of fledglings. Google, for example, started in a garage in Silicon Valley. It wasn't evident they would become these huge giants.
Michelle said the G word, Google. James, what's Google got to do with all of this?
If you were a lawyer and you were going to try and choose one case you thought you had the best chance of winning, I would say Google is your best bet. It has its search engine, 90% plus of all of the searches in the world are on Google. And as a result of that, it really does have a huge monopoly over search. I mean, it's just there's no way of getting around that.
But what does it do with that monopoly? Because surely if you just do a search on the internet, you just get the results, don't you?
Yeah, right. Well, you don't. You get adverts. You get a lot of adverts, and people pay an obscene amount of money to advertise to be the first thing that comes up. And actually, in a perfect search engine, there would be an algorithm that is put together that is the most relevant thing, the thing that you are looking for comes up first. That is not the case with Google. And what people will say in terms of that is, if there was more competition, Google wouldn't be able to advertise as much on Google search. And as a result of that, you might get a better product. So essentially, there is not enough competition in search. If you look at around the world, Google has already been fined for this practice. On top of that, you also have Google runs the Android operating system, and it has exactly the same accusations of antitrust level to it that Apple does with the App Store too. So you have two, not one, but two really pretty solid cases.
I'm just wondering what potential remedies could look like and have looked like in the past. Like, what actual tools, James, have these trade guys got at their disposal?
I mean, the ultimate tool is breaking up the company. That's the ultimate tool. And
in other words, saying to Meta, you've got to sell Instagram.
Yeah. And
for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't think anyone in Silicon Valley takes that threat seriously, but that has been absolutely a threat that has been articulated, by the way, by the Biden administration.
I'm loath to say the word presidential election. I mean, it's two words. But does this, if Biden is reelected for a second term, does this work carry on and we just get more of the same? Or actually, could he go in a different direction? And then if Trump is reelected for a second term, does he rip all of this up and just let the companies do what they want?
I think the big difference between a Trump administration and a Biden administration is Trump will go after Meta and after Zuckerberg in a way that they've yet to experience. Trump hates Zuckerberg. I mean, Zuckerberg made the decision to suspend Donald Trump after the Capitol Hill riots.
James, I'm going to give you the last word because the way we framed this podcast, it's been looking at Lina Khan and the organization that she runs and what she's trying to do. So it's inevitably been sort of skewed in that direction. Skew it for us in the other direction and just put us into the minds of the people you used to hang out with in Silicon Valley all the time.
Big tech would certainly say that a lot of this is political. A lot of it is based on the politics of envy. They would say that these are some of the most successful American companies in history, and you are deliberately targeting American companies in a way that it is in self anti-American. Now, what you'll also get in Silicon Valley is a lot of people saying, I would love for Google to get regulated more, Apple to get regulated more, because then there might be more competition and our startup might have a better chance of, maybe creating a great new search engine.
Well, James, thank you for letting us exploit you today.
Very good.
And Michelle, thanks to you too in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And thank you to you too for being with us on The Global Story. If you like the sound of what you've heard, then you can find all our podcast episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would like to subscribe to us, then that means you will never miss an episode. And of course, you can leave your comments, whatever they are, down below.